his trucks by invoking the Dodge Rebellion. How is one to be a bona fide iconoclast when Burger King sells onion rings with "sometimes you gotta break the rules"? How can an image fiction writer hope to make people more critical of televisual culture by parodying television as a self-serving commercial enterprise when Pepsi and Subaru and FedEx parodies of self-serving commercials are already doing big business? It's almost a history lesson. I'm starting to see just why turn of the last century Americans' biggest fear was of anarchists and anarchy. For if anarchy actually wins, if rulelessness becomes the rule, then protest and change become not just impossible but incoherent. It'd be like casting a ballot for Stalin. You are voting for an end to all voting. So here's the stumper for the US writer who both breathes our cultural atmosphere and sees himself heir to whatever was neat and valuable in avant-garde literature. How to rebel against TV's aesthetic of rebellion. How to snap readers awake to the fact that our televisual culture has become a cynical, narcissistic, essentially empty phenomenon when television regularly celebrates just these features in itself and its viewers? These are the very questions DeLillo's poor schmuck of a popologist was asking back in '85 about America. That most photographed of barns. What was the barn like before it was photographed? He said. What did it look like? How was it different from other barns? How was it similar to other barns? We can't answer these questions because we've read the signs, seen the people snapping the pictures. We can't get outside the aura. We're part of the aura. We're here. We're now. He seemed immensely pleased by this. End of the line. What responses to television's commercialization of the modes of literary protest seem possible then today? One obvious option is for the fiction writer to become reactionary, fundamentalist, declare contemporary television evil and contemporary culture evil, and turn one's back on the whole spandexed mess and invoke instead good old pre-1960s Hugh Beaumontish virtues and literal readings of the Testaments and be pro-life, anti-fluoride, antediluvian. The problem with this is that Americans who've opted for this tack seem to have one eyebrow straight across their forehead and knuckles that drag on the ground and really tall hair, and in general just seem like an excellent crowd to want to transcend. Besides, the rise of Reagan, Bush, Gingrich showed that hypocritical nostalgia for a kinder, gentler, more Christian pseudo-past is no less susceptible to manipulation in the interests of corporate commercialism and PR image. Most of us will still take nihilism over Neanderthalism. Another option would be to adopt a somewhat more enlightened political conservatism that exempts viewer and networks alike from any complicity in the bitter stasis of televisual culture and which instead blames all TV-related problems on certain correctable defects in technology. Enter media futurologist George Gilder, a Hudson Institute senior fellow and author of Life After Television, The Coming Transformation of Media and American Life. The single most fascinating thing about Life After Television is that it's a book with commercials. Published in something called the Larger Agenda series by one Whittle Direct Books in Federal Express Inc.'s Knoxville headquarters, the book sells for only $11 hard, including postage, is big and thin enough to look great on executive coffee tables, and has very pretty full-page ads for Federal Express on every fifth page. The book's also largely a work of fiction, plus it's a heart-rending dramatization of why anti-TV conservatives, motivated by simple convictions like television is at heart a totalitarian medium, whose system is an alien and corrosive force in democratic capitalism are going to be of little help with our ultra-radical TV problems, attached as conservative intellectuals are to their twin-tired remedies for all U.S. ills, viz. The beliefs that, 1, the discerning consumer instincts of the little guy will correct all imbalances if only big systems will quit stifling his freedom to choose, and that, 2, technology-bred problems can be resolved technologically. Gilder's basic diagnosis runs thus. Television as we know and suffer it is a technology with supreme powers but deadly flaws. The really fatal flaw is that the whole structure of television programming, broadcasting, and reception is still informed by the technological limitations of the old vacuum tubes that first enabled TV. The expense and complexity of these tubes used in television sets meant that most of the processing of signals would have to be done at the networks. A state of affairs which dictated that television would be a top-down system, in electronic terms, a master-slave architecture. A few broadcasting centers would originate programs for millions of passive receivers or dumb terminals. By the time the transistor, which does essentially what vacuum tubes do but in less space at lower cost, found commercial applications, the top-down TV system was already entrenched and petrified, dooming viewers to docile reception of programs they were dependent on a very few networks to provide, and creating a psychology of the masses in which a trio of programming alternatives aimed to appeal to millions and millions of Joe B's. The TV signals are analog waves. Analogs are the required medium, since, with little storage or processing available at the set, the signals would have to be directly displayable waves, and analog waves directly simulate sound, brightness, and color. But analog waves can't be saved or edited by their recipient. They're too much like life. They're in gorgeous toto, one instant and then gone. What the poor TV viewer gets is only what he sees. This state of affairs has cultural consequences Gilder describes in apocalyptic detail. Even high-definition television, HD TV, touted by the industry as the next big advance in entertainment will, according to Gilder, be just the same vacuous emperor in a snazzier suit. But for Gilder, TV, still clinging to the crowd-binding and hierarchical technologies of yesterdecade, is now doomed by the advances in microchip and fiber optic technology of the last few years. The user-friendly microchip, which consolidates the activities of millions of transistors on one 49-cent wafer, and whose capacities will get even more attractive as controlled electron conduction approaches the geodesic paradigm of efficiency, will allow receivers, TV sets, to do much of the image processing that has hitherto been done for the viewer by the broadcaster. In another happy development, transporting images through glass fibers rather than via the EM spectrum will allow people's TV sets to be hooked up with each other in a kind of interactive net, instead of all feeding passively at the transmitting teat of a single broadcaster. And fiber optic transmissions have the further advantage that they conduct characters of information digitally, since, as Gilder explains, digital signals have an advantage over analog signals in that they can be stored and manipulated without deterioration, as well as being crisp and interferenceless as quality CDs. They'll allow the microchipped television receiver, and thus the viewer, to enjoy much of the discretion over selection, manipulation, and recombination of video images that is today restricted to the director's booth. For Gilder, the new piece of furniture that will free Joe Briefcase from passive dependence on his furniture will be the telecomputer, a personal computer adapted for video processing and connected by fiber optic threads to other telecomputers around the world. The fibrous TC will forever break the broadcast bottleneck of television's one over many structure of image dissemination. Now, everybody'll get to be his own harried guy with earphones and clipboard. In the new millennium, US television will finally become ideally GOP-ishly democratic, egalitarian, interactive, and profitable without being exploited. Boy, does Gilder know his larger agenda audience. You can just see saliva overflowing lower lips in boardrooms as Gilder forecasts that the consumer's whole complicated, fuzzy, inconveniently transient world will become storable, manipulable, broadcastable, and viewable in the comfort of his own condo. With artful programming of telecomputers, you could spend a day interacting on the screen with Henry Kissinger, Kim Basinger, or Billy Graham. Rather ghastly interactions to contemplate, perhaps, but then in Gilderland, each to his own. Celebrities could produce and sell their own software. You could view the Super Bowl from any point in the stadium you choose, or soar above the basket with Michael Jordan. Visit your family on the other side of the world with moving pictures hardly distinguishable from real-life images. Give a birthday party for Grandma in her nursing home in Florida, bringing her descendants from all over the country to the foot of her bed in living color. And not just warm 2D images of family. Any experience will be transferable to image and marketable, manipulable, consumable. People will be able to go comfortably sightseeing from their living room through high-resolution screens, visiting third world countries without having to worry about airfares or exchange rates. You could fly an airplane over the Alps or climb Mount Everest, all on a powerful high-resolution display. We will, in short, be able to engineer our own dreams. So, in sum, a conservative tech writer offers a really attractive way of looking at viewer passivity, at TV's institutionalization of irony, narcissism, nihilism, stasis, loneliness. It's not our fault. It's outmoded technology's fault. If TV dissemination were up to date, it would be impossible for it to institutionalize anything through its demonic mass psychology. Let's let Joe B, the little lonely average guy, be his own manipulator of video games. Once all experiences finally reduced to marketable image, once the receiving user of user-friendly receivers can break from the coffle and choose freely, Americanly, from an Americanly infinite variety of moving images, hardly distinguishable from real-life images, and can then choose further just how he wishes to store, enhance, edit, recombine, and present those images to himself in the privacy of his very own home and skull, then TV's ironic totalitarian grip on the American psychic cojones will be broken. Note that Gilder's semiconducted vision of a free, orderly video future is way more upbeat than postmodernism's old view of image and data. The novels of Pynchon and DeLillo revolve metaphorically off the concept of interference. The more connections, the more chaos, and the harder it is to cull any meaning from the seas of signal. Gilder would call their gloom outmoded, their metaphor infected with the deficiencies of the transistor. In all networks of wires and switches, except for those on the microchip, complexity tends to grow exponentially as the number of interconnections rises. But in the silicon maze of microchip technology, efficiency, not complexity, grows as the square of the number of interconnections to be organized. Rather than a vacuous TV culture drowning in cruddy images, Gilder foresees a TC culture redeemed by a whole lot more to choose from and a whole lot more control over what you choose to, see? Pseudo-experience? Dream? It's wildly unrealistic to think that expanded choices alone will resolve our televisual bind. The advent of cable upped choices from 4 or 5 to 40 plus synchronic alternatives, with little apparent loosening of television's grip on mass attitudes. It seems, rather, that Gilder sees the 90s impending breakthrough as U.S. viewers' graduation from passive reception of facsimiles of experience to active manipulation of facsimiles of experience. It's worth questioning Gilder's definition of televisual passivity. His new tech would indeed end the passivity of mere reception, but the passivity of audience, the acquiescence inherent in a whole culture of and about watching, looks unaffected by TCs. The appeal of watching television has always involved fantasy, and contemporary TV has gotten vastly better at enabling the viewer's fantasy that he can transcend the limitations of individual human experience, that he can be inside the set, imago, anyone, anywhere, a term Gitlin uses in We Build Excitement. Since the limitations of being one human being involve certain restrictions on the number of different experiences possible to us in a given period of time, it's arguable that the biggest TV tech advances of recent years have done little but abet this fantasy of escape from the defining limits of being human. Cable expanded our choices of evening realities. Handheld gizmos let us leap instantly from one reality to another. VCRs let us commit experiences to an eidetic memory that permits re-experience at any time without loss or alteration. These advances sold briskly and upped average viewing doses, but they sure haven't made U.S. televisual culture any less passive or cynical. Of course, the downside of TV's big fantasy is that it's just a fantasy. As a treat, my escape from the limits of genuine experience is neato. As a steady diet, though, it can't help but render my own reality less attractive, because in it I'm just one Dave with limits and restrictions all over the place. Render me less fit to make the most of it, because I spend all my time pretending I'm not in it, and render me ever more dependent on the device that affords escape from just what my escapism makes unpleasant. It's tough to see how Gilder's soterial vision of having more control over the arrangement of high-quality fantasy bits is going to ease either the dependency that is part of my relation to TV, or the impotent irony I must use to pretend I'm not dependent. Whether I'm passive or active as a viewer, I still must cynically pretend because I'm still dependent, because my real dependency here is not on a single show or a few networks anymore than the hopheads is on the Turkish florist or the Marseilles refiner. My real dependence is on the fantasies and the images that enable them, and thus on any technology that can make images both available and fantastic. Make no mistake, we are dependent on image technology, and the better the tech, the harder we're hooked. The paradox in Gilder's rosy forecast is the same as in all forms of artificial enhancement. The more enhancing the mediation, see for instance binoculars, amplifiers, graphic equalizers, or moving pictures hardly distinguishable from real-life images, the more direct, vivid, and real the experience seems, which is to say, the more direct, vivid, and real the fantasy and dependence are. An exponential surge in the mass of televisual images and a commensurate increase in my ability to cut, paste, magnify, and combine them to suit my own fancy can do nothing but render my interactive TC a more powerful enhancer and enabler of fantasy. My attraction to that fantasy stronger, the real experiences of which my TC offers more engaging and controllable simulacra paler and more frustrating to deal with, and me just a whole lot more dependent on my furniture. Jacking the number of choices and options up with better tech will remedy exactly nothing, so long as no sources of insight on comparative worth, no guides to why and how to choose among experiences, fantasies, beliefs, and predilections are permitted serious consideration in U.S. culture. Insights and guides to value used to be among literature's jobs, didn't they? But then who's going to want to take such stuff seriously in ecstatic post-TV life, with Kim Basinger waiting to be interacted with? Oh God, I've just reread my criticisms of Gilder. That he is naive. That he is an ill-disguised apologist for corporate self-interest. That his book has commercials. That beneath its futuristic novelty, it's just the same old American same old that got us into this televisual mess. That Gilder vastly underestimates the intractability of the mess. Its hopelessness, our gullibility, fatigue, disgust. My attitude reading Gilder has been sardonic, aloof, depressed. I have tried to make his book look ridiculous, which it is, but still. My reading of Gilder is televisual. I am in the aura. Well, but at least good old Gilder is unironic. In this respect, he's like a cool summer breeze compared to Mark Lehner, the young New Jersey medical ad copywriter whose My Cousin, My Gastroenterologist is the biggest thing for campus hipsters since The Fountainhead. Lehner's novel exemplifies a third kind of literary response to our problem. For of course, young U.S. writers can resolve the problem of being trapped in the televisual aura the same way French post-structuralists resolve their hopeless enmeshment in the logos. We can resolve the problem by celebrating it. Transcend feelings of mass-defined angst by genuflecting to them. We can be reverently ironic. My Cousin, My Gastroenterologist is new not so much in kind as in degree. It is a methadone compound of pop pastiche, offhand high-tech, and dazzling televisual parody, formed with surreal juxtapositions and grammarless monologues and flash-cut editing, and framed with a relentless irony designed to make its frantic tone seem irreverent instead of repellent. You want send-ups of commercial culture? I had just been fired from McDonald's for refusing to wear a kilt during production launch week for their new McHaggis sandwich. He picks up a copy of Das Pluma-Denken, New England's most disreputable German-language news magazine. Blastin' egg cream factory kills. Philatelist, he turns the page radioactive glow-in-the-dark semen found in Canada. He turns the page modern day. Hottentots carry young in resealable sandwich bags. He turns the page. Wayne Newton calls mother's womb single occupancy Garden of Eden. Morgan Fairchild calls Sally Struthers Lonnie Anderson. What color is your mozzarella? I asked the waitress. It's pink. It's the same color as the top of a Men and Lady Speed Stick dispenser. You know that color? No, ma'am, I said. It's the same color they use for the Gillette Daisy disposable razors for women. You know that color? Nope. Well, it's the same pink as Pepto-Bismol. You know that color? Oh, yeah, I said. Well, do you have spaghetti? You want mordant send-ups of television? Muriel got the TV guide, flipped to Tuesday, 8 p.m., and read aloud. There's a show called A Tumult of Pubic Hair and Bobbing Flaccid Penises as sweaty, naked, chubby men run from the sauna screaming, "Snake! Snake!" It also stars Brian Keith, Buddy Ebsen, Nipsey Russell, and Leslie Ann Warren. You like mocking self-reference? The novel's whole last chapter is a parody of its own About the Author page. Or maybe you're into hip identitylessness. Grandma rolled up a magazine and hit Buzz on the side of the head. Buzz's mask was knocked loose. There was no skin beneath that mask. There were 2 white eyeballs protruding on stems from a mass of oozing blood-red musculature. I can't tell if she's human or fifth-generation gynomorphic android, and I don't care. Erotic mediation on the boundaryless flux of televisual monoculture? I'm stirring a pitcher of Tanqueray martinis with one hand and sliding a tray of frozen clams oreganata into the oven with my foot. God, these methadone suppositories that Yogi Vitaldas gave me are good. As I iron a pair of tennis shorts, I dictate a haiku into the tape recorder and then do 3 minutes on the speed bag before making an origami praying mantis, and then reading an article in High Fidelity magazine as I stir the coq au vin. The decay of both the limits and the integrity of the single human self. There was a woman with the shrunken, wrinkled face of an 80 or 90-year-old. And this withered hag, this apparent octogenarian, had the body of a male Olympic swimmer. The long, lean, sinewy arms, the powerful V-shaped upper torso without a single ounce of fat. To install your replacement head, place the head assembly on neck housing and insert guide pins through mounting holes. If, after installing new head, you are unable to discern the contradictions in capitalist modes of production, you have either installed your head improperly or head is defective. In fact, one of my gastroenterologist's unifying obsessions is this latter juxtaposition of parts of selves, people and machines, human subjects and discrete objects. Lehner's fiction is, in this regard, an eloquent reply to Gilder's prediction that our TV culture problems can be resolved by the dismantling of images into discrete chunks we can recombine however we wish. Lehner's world is a Gilderesque dystopia. The passivity and schizoid decay still endure for Lehner in his character's reception of images and waves of data. The ability to combine them only adds a layer of disorientation. When all experience can be deconstructed and reconfigured, there become simply too many choices. And in the absence of any credible, non-commercial guides for living, the freedom to choose is about as liberating as a bad acid trip. Each quantum is as good as the next, and the only standard of a particular construct's quality is its weirdness, incongruity, its ability to stand out from a crowd of other image constructs and wow some audience. Lehner's own novel, in its amphetaminic eagerness to wow the reader, marks the far dark frontier of the fiction of image. Literature's absorption of not just the icons, techniques, and phenomena of television, but of television's whole objective. My gastroenterologist's sole aim is finally to wow, to ensure that the reader is pleased and continues to read. The book does this by 1. Flattering the reader with appeals to his erudite postmodern Weltschmerz, and 2. Relentlessly reminding the reader that the author is smart and funny. The book itself is extremely funny, but it's not funny the way funny stories are funny. It's not that funny things happen here, it's that funny things are self-consciously imagined and pointed out, like a comedian's stock, "You ever notice how?" and "You ever wonder what would happen if?" Actually, Lehner's whole high imagist style most often resembles a kind of lapidary stand-up comedy. Suddenly Bob couldn't speak properly. He had suffered some form of spontaneous aphasia. But it wasn't total aphasia. He could speak, but only in a staccato telegraphic style. Here's how he described driving through the Midwest on Interstate 80. Corn, 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 Stuckies. Corn, 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 Stuckies. There's a bar on the highway which caters almost exclusively to authority figures, and the only drink it serves is light beer, and the only food it serves is surf and turf. And the place is filled with cops and state troopers and gym teachers and green berets and toll attendants and game wardens and crossing guards and umpires. Lehner's fictional response to television is less a novel than a piece of witty, erudite, extremely high-quality prose television. Velocity and vividness replace development. People flicker in and out. Events are garishly there and then gone and never referred to. There's a brashly irreverent rejection of outmoded concepts like integrated plot or enduring character. Instead, there's a series of dazzlingly creative, parodic vignettes designed to appeal to the 45 seconds of near-zen concentration we call the TV attention span. In the absence of a plot, unifying the vignettes are moods, antic anxiety, the overstimulated stasis of too many choices and no chooser's manual, irreverent brashness toward televisual reality. And after the manner of films, music videos, dreams, and television programs, there are recurring key images. Here, exotic drugs, exotic technologies, exotic foods, exotic bowel dysfunctions. And it is no accident that my cousin, my gastroenterologist's central preoccupation is with digestion and elimination. Its mocking challenge to the reader is the same one presented by television's flood of realities and choices. Absorb me. Prove you're consumer enough. Lehner's work, the best image fiction yet, is both amazing and forgettable, wonderful and oddly hollow. I'm concluding by talking about it at length because, in its masterful reabsorption of the very features TV has itself absorbed from postmodern art, Lehner's book seems like the ultimate union of U.S. television and fiction. It seems also to cast the predicament of image fiction itself into stark relief. The best stuff the subgenres produced to date is hilarious, upsetting, sophisticated, and extremely shallow. Doomed to shallowness by its desire to ridicule a TV culture whose mockery of itself and all value already absorbs all ridicule. Lehner's attempt to respond to television via ironic genuflection is all too easily subsumed into the tired televisual ritual of mock worship. It is dead on the page. It's entirely possible that my plangent noises about the impossibility of rebelling against a power that promotes and vitiates all rebellion say more about my residency in Salvatore, my own lack of vision, than they do about any exhaustion of U.S. fiction's possibilities. The next real literary rebels in this country might well emerge as some weird bunch of anti-rebels, born oglers who dare somehow to back away from ironic watching, who have the childish gall actually to endorse and instantiate single entendre principles, who treat of plain old untrendy human troubles and emotions in U.S. life with reverence and conviction, who eschew self-consciousness and hip fatigue. These anti-rebels would be outdated, of course, before they even started. Dead on the page, too sincere, clearly repressed, backward, quaint, naive, anachronistic. Maybe that'll be the point. Maybe that's why they'll be the next real rebels. Real rebels, as far as I can see, risk disapproval. The old postmodern insurgents risked the gasp and squeal. Shock, disgust, outrage, censorship, accusations of socialism, anarchism, nihilism. Today's risks are different. The new rebels might be artists willing to risk the yawn, the rolled eyes, the cool smile, the nudged ribs, the parody of gifted ironists, the, oh, how banal. To risk accusations of sentimentality, melodrama, of over-credulity, of softness, of willingness to be succored by a world of lurkers and starers who fear, gaze, and ridicule above imprisonment without law. Who knows? Today's most engaged young fiction does seem like some kind of lines ends end. I guess that means we all get to draw our own conclusions. Have to. Are you immensely pleased? 1990. Getting away from already pretty much being away from it all. 8:05:93, 0800 hours. Press day is a week or so before the fair opens. I'm supposed to be at the grounds Illinois building by like 0900 to get press credentials. I imagine credentials to be a small white card in the band of a fedora. I've never been considered press before. My main interest in credentials is getting into rides and stuff for free. I'm fresh in from the East Coast to go to the Illinois State Fair for a swanky East Coast magazine. Why exactly a swanky East Coast magazine is interested in the Illinois State Fair remains unclear to me. I suspect that every so often editors at these magazines slap their foreheads and remember that about 90% of the United States lies between the coasts, and figure they'll engage somebody to do pith-helmeted anthropological reporting on something rural and heartlandish. I think they decided to engage me for this because I actually grew up around it, just a couple hours drive from downstate Spain. I never did go to the state fair, though, growing up. I pretty much topped out at the county fair level. In August, it takes hours for the dawn fogs to burn off. The air's like wet wool. 0800 hours is too early to justify the car's AC. I'm on I-55 going south-southwest. The sun's a blotch in a sky that isn't so much cloudy as opaque. The corn starts just past the breakdown lanes and goes right to the sky's hem. The August corn's as tall as a tall man. Illinois corn is now knee-high by about the 4th of May, what with all the advances in fertilizers and herbicides. Locusts churr in every field, a brassy electric sound that dopplers oddly in the speeding car. Corn, soybeans, corn, exit ramp, corn, and every few miles an outpost way off on a reach in the distance. House, tree with tire swing, barn, satellite dish. Grain silos are the only real skyline. The interstate is dull and pale. The occasional other cars all look ghostly, the drivers' faces humidity-stunned. A fog hangs just over the fields like the land's mind or something. The temperature's over 80 and already climbing with the sun. It'll be 90 plus by 1000 hours. You can tell. There's already that tightening quality to the air, like it's drawing itself in for a long siege. Credentials, 0900 hours. Welcome and briefing, 0915 hours. Press tour on special tram, 0945 hours. I grew up in rural Illinois, but haven't been back for a long time and can't say I've missed it. The yeasty heat, the lush desolation of limitless corn, the flatness. But it's like bike riding in a way. The native body readjusts automatically to the flatness, and as your calibration gets finer, driving, you can start to notice that the dead level flatness is only apparent. There are unevennesses, ups and downs, slight but rhythmic. Straight shot I-55 will start ever so slightly to rise maybe 5 degrees over a mile, then go just as gentle back down, and then you see an overpass bridge ahead over a river, the Salt Fork, the Sangamon. The rivers are swollen, but nothing like out around St. Louis. These gentle rises and then dips down to rivers are glacial moraines, edges of the old ice that shaved the Midwest. The middling rivers have their origin in glacial runoff. The whole drive is a gentle sine wave like this, but it's like sea legs. If you haven't spent years here, you'll never feel it. To people from the coasts, rural Illinois' topography is a nightmare. Something to hunker down and speed through, the sky opaque, the dull crop green constant, the land flat and dull and endless, a monotone for the eyes. For natives, it's different. For me, at least, it got creepy. By the time I left for college, the area no longer seemed dull so much as empty, lonely. Middle of the ocean lonely. You can go weeks without seeing a neighbor. It gets to you. 0805-0900 hours. But so it's still a week before the fair, and there's something surreal about the emptiness of parking facilities so huge and complex that they have their own map. The parts of the fairgrounds that I can see, pulling in, are half-permanent structures, and half-tents and displays in various stages of erection, giving the whole thing the look of somebody half-dressed for a really important date. 0805-0905 hours. The man processing press credentials is bland and pale, and has a mustache and a short-sleeved knit shirt. In line before me are news hounds from Today's Agriculture, the Decatur Herald and Review, Illinois Crafts Newsletter, 4-H News, and Livestock Weekly. Press credentials turn out to be just a laminated mugshot with a gator clip for your pocket. Not a fedora in the house. Two older ladies from a local horticulture organ behind me engage me in shop talk. One of these ladies describes herself as the unofficial historian of the Illinois State Fair. She goes around giving slideshows on the fair at nursing homes and Rotary lunches. She begins to emit historical data at a great rate. The fair started in 1853. There was a fair every year during the Civil War, but not during World War II, plus no fair in 1893 for some reason. The governor has failed to cut the ribbon personally on opening day only twice, etc. It occurs to me I probably ought to have brought a notebook. I also notice I'm the only person in the room in a t-shirt. It's a fluorescent-lit cafeteria in something called the Illinois Building Senior Center. Uncool. All the local TV crews have their equipment spread out on tables and are lounging against walls talking about the apocalyptic 1993 floods to the immediate west, which floods are ongoing. They all have mustaches and short-sleeved knit shirts. In fact, the only other males in the room without mustaches and golf shirts are the local TV reporters, 4 of them, all in Euro-cut suits. They are sleek, sweatless, deeply blue-eyed. They stand together up by the dais. The dais has a podium and a flag and a banner with "Give us a whirl" on it, which I deduce is probably this year's fair's theme, sort of the way senior proms have a theme. There's a compelling frictionlessness about the local TV reporters, all of whom have short blonde hair and vaguely orange makeup. A vividness. I keep feeling a queer urge to vote for them for something. The older ladies behind me tell me they've bet I'm here to cover either the auto racing or the pop music. They don't mean it unkindly. I tell them why I'm here, mentioning the magazine's name. They turn toward each other, faces alight. One, not the historian, actually claps her hands to her cheeks. "Love the recipes," she says. "Adore the recipes," the unofficial historian says. And I'm sort of impelled over to a table of all post-45 females. I'm introduced as on assignment from Harper's Magazine, and everyone looks at one another with starstruck awe and concurs that the recipes really are first-rate, top hole, the living end. One seminal recipe involving amaretto and something called baker's chocolate is being recalled and discussed when a loudspeaker's feedback brings the fair's official press welcome and briefing to order. The briefing is dull. We are less addressed than rhetorically bludgeoned by fair personnel, product spokespeople, and middle management state politicos. The words excited, proud, and opportunity are used a total of 76 times before I get distracted off the count. I've suddenly figured out that all the older ladies I'm at the table with have confused Harper's with Harper's Bazaar. They think I'm some sort of food writer or recipe scout, here to maybe vault some of the Midwestern food competition winners into the homemaker's big time. Miss Illinois State Fair tiara, bolted to the tallest coiffure I've ever seen, bun atop bun, multiple layers, a veritable wedding cake of hair, is proudly excited to have the opportunity to present two corporate guys, dead-eyed and sweating freely in suits, who in turn report the excited pride of McDonald's and Walmart at having the opportunity to be this year's fair's major corporate sponsors. It occurs to me that if I allow the Harper's Bazaar food scout misunderstanding to persist and circulate, I can eventually show up at the dessert competition tents with my press credentials, and they'll feed me free prize-winning desserts until I have to be carried off on a gurney. Older ladies in the Midwest can bake. 08050950 hours. Underway at 4 miles per hour on the press tour, on a kind of flatboat with wheels and a lengthwise bench so ridiculously high that everybody's feet dangle. The tractor pulling us has signs that say ethanol and agri-powered. I'm particularly keen to see the carnies setting up rides in the fairgrounds' Happy Hollow, but we head first to the corporate and political tents. Most every tent is still setting up. Workmen crawl over structural frames. We wave at them, they wave back. It's absurd. We're only going 4 miles per hour. One tent says, corn, touching our lives every day. There are massive, many-hued tents courtesy of McDonald's, Miller Genuine Draft, Osco, Morton Commercial Structures Corporation, the Land of Lincoln Soybean Association, look where soybeans go, on a half-up display. Pekin Energy Corporation, proud of our sophisticated computer-controlled processing technology. Illinois Pork Producers and the John Birch Society. We'll be checking out that tent for sure. 2 tents that say Republican and Democrat. Other smaller tents for various Illinois office holders. It's well up in the 90s and the sky is the color of old jeans. Over a system of crests to Farm Expo, 12 acres of wicked-looking needle-teethed harrows, tractors, harvesters, and seeders, and then Conservation World. 22 acres I never do get straight on the conserving purpose of. Then back around the rear of the big permanent structures. Artisans Building, Illinois Building, Senior Center, Expo Center. It says poultry on the tympanum, but it's the Expo Center. Passing tantalizingly close to Happy Hollow, where half-assembled rides stand in giant arcs and rays, and shirtless guys with tattoos and wrenches slouch around them, fairly oozing menace and human interest. And I want a chance to chat with them before the hollow opens, and there's pressure to actually ride the carnival rides, since I am one of those people who gets sick on near-death experience carnival rides. But on at a crawl up a blacktop path to the livestock buildings on the fairground's west upwind side. By this time, most of the press is off the tram and walking in order to escape the tour's PA speaker, which is tinny and brutal. Horse complex, cattle complex, swine barn, sheep barn, poultry and goat barns. These are all long brick barracks open down both sides of their length. Inside some are stalls, others have pens divided into squares with aluminum rails. Inside, they're gray cement, dim and pungent, huge fans overhead, workers in overalls and waiters hosing everything down. No animals yet, but the smells still hang from last year. Horses' odors sharp, cows rich, sheep's oily, swine's unspeakable. No idea what the poultry barn smelled like because I couldn't bring myself to go in. Traumatically pecked once as a child at the Champaign County Fair, I have a long-standing phobic thing about poultry. The ethanol tractor's exhaust is literally flatulent smelling, as we crawl out past the grandstand, where there will apparently be evening concerts and harness and auto racing, world's fastest mile dirt track, and head for something called the Help Me Grow tent to interface with the state's First Lady, Brenda Edgar. It occurs to me that the 366-acre terrain of the fairgrounds is awfully hilly for downstate Illinois. It's either a geologic anomaly, or it's been man-enhanced. The Help Me Grow tent is on a grassy ridge that overlooks Happy Hollow. I think it's near where I parked. The dismantled-looking rides out below make the view complex. The Expo Center and Coliseum across the hollow, on an opposite ridge, have odd neo-Georgian facades, a lot like the older buildings at the State University over in Champaign. Nature-wise, the view is lovely. The serious flooding's well to the west of Springfield, but we've had the same rains, and the grass here is lush and deep green. The trees' leaves balloon explosively like trees in Fragonard, and everything smells juicy and highly edible, and still growing here in a month when I remember everything as tired and dry. The first sign of the Help Me Grow area is the nauseous bright red of Ronald McDonald's hair. He's capering around a small, plasticky playground area under candy-stripe tenting. Though the fair's ostensibly unopen, troops of kids mysteriously appear and engage in rather rehearsed-looking play as we approach. Two of the kids are black, the first black people I've seen anywhere on the fairgrounds. No parents in view. Just outside the tent, the governor's wife stands surrounded by flinty-eyed aides. Ronald pretends to fall down. The press forms itself into a kind of ring. There are several state troopers in khaki and tan, streaming sweat under their Nelson Eddy hats. My view isn't very good. Mrs. Edgar is cool and groomed and pretty in a lacquered way, of the sort of female age that's always suffixed with ish. Her tragic flaw is her voice, which sounds almost heliated. The Mrs. Edgar/McDonald program, when you decoct the rhetoric, is basically a statewide crisis line for over-the-edge parents to call and get talked out of beating up their kids. The number of calls Mrs. Edgar says the lines fielded just this year is both and impressive. Shiny pamphlets are distributed. Ronald McDonald, speech slurry and makeup cottage cheesy-ish in the heat, use the kids to come over for some low-rent sleight of hand and Socratic banter. Lacking a real journalist's killer instinct, I've been jostled way to the back of the ring, and my view is obscured by the towering hair of Miss Illinois State Fair, whose function on the press tour remains unclear. I don't want to asperse, but Ronald McDonald sounds like he's under the influence of something more than fresh country air. I drift away under the tent, where there's a metal water cooler, but no cups. It's hotter under the tent, and there's a reek of fresh plastic. All the toys and plastic playground equipment have signs that say, courtesy of, and then a corporate name. A lot of the photographers in the ring have on dusty green safari vests, and they sit cross-legged in the sun, getting low-angle shots of Mrs. Edgar. There are no tough questions from the media. The tram's tractor is putting out a steady sweat-sock shape of blue-green exhaust. Right at the edge of the tent is where I noticed that the grass is different. The grass under the tenting is a different grass, pine green and prickly looking, more like the St. Augustine grass of the deep U.S. South. Solid, bent-over, investigative journalism reveals that, in fact, it's artificial grass. A huge mat of plastic artificial grass has been spread over the knoll's real grass under the candy-striped tent. This may have been my only moment of complete East Coast cynicism the whole day. A quick look under the edge of the fake grass mat reveals the real grass underneath, flattened and already yellowing. One of the few things I still miss from my Midwest childhood was this weird, eluded but unshakable conviction that everything around me existed, all and only for me. Am I the only one who had this weird, deep sense as a kid? That everything exterior to me existed only insofar as it affected me somehow? That all things were somehow via some occult, adult activity, specially arranged for my benefit? Does anybody else identify with this memory? The child leaves a room, and now everything in that room, once he's no longer there to see it, melts away into some void of potential, or else, my personal childhood theory, is trundled away by occult adults and stored until the child's re-entry into the room recalls it back into animate service. Was this nuts? It was radically self-centered, of course, this conviction, and more than a little paranoid. Plus the responsibility it conferred. If the whole of the world dissolved and resolved each time I blinked, what if my eyes didn't open? Maybe what I really miss now is the fact that a child's radical, delusive self-centeredness doesn't cause him conflict or pain. His is the sort of regally innocent solipsism of, like, Bishop Berkeley's God. All things are nothing until his sight calls them forth from the void. His stimulation is the world's very being. And this is maybe why a little kid so fears the dark. It's not the possible presence of unseen fanged things in the dark, but rather the actual absence of everything his blindness has now erased. For me, at least, pace my folks' indulgent smiles, this was my true reason for needing a nightlight. It kept the world turning. Plus, maybe the sense of the world as all and only for him is why special ritual public occasions drive a kid right out of his mind with excitement. Holidays, parades, summer trips, sporting events, fairs,